This story is told by Hannah. When we experienced the odd imaginary friend situation and heard footsteps in the house, etc., we didn't jump to ghost until quite late on. It was one of those things where if you'd watch it on film, you'd say, why wouldn't you move out when you can hear things in the attic or running around upstairs? But we really didn't think much of it straight away. One of my cousins who I lived with was only a tiny human when it began, and he was somewhat mischievous. But when he began to say Bella Lucia made me do it, we were like, who? Bella Lucia was someone only my cousin Tom could see and talk to, apparently. A girl who I think was about 5 years old. So here's the story. For context, when I was about 13, my sister, my dad, and myself moved into a bigger house with my auntie, uncle, and my 2 cousins, who were 3 and 5 at the time. It was a house that was relatively old, but nothing ancient. My sister and I shared a room on the bottom floor. My dad was in the room next to us, and we had our own bathroom. Upstairs, the kids had their own rooms, and my auntie and uncle had a room. My youngest cousin Tom was a mischievous kid, and there were stories where he saw people. He once said to his mom, "Who's that man in the kitchen?" And on investigating, there was no one there. When he moved into this house with us, he started to misbehave, and would say, "Bella Lucia told me to do it." It was such a specifically odd name that we thought, how would a 3-year-old come up with that name? Then my sister and I started getting bruises and hearing noises that spooked us, but we hadn't put 2 and 2 together. One night I heard running upstairs, and I said to my auntie the next morning that I'd heard Tom running around, and asked if he'd had a rough night. She said no, he'd slept all night in his bed. And I was like, no, I 100,000% heard a little kid running about. But she said he didn't wake them up at all, which he typically would. Bella Lucia would then start talking to Tom more and more, and he'd say Bella Lucia said it's time to go play upstairs now. We started to ask Tom who Bella Lucia was. He said she was a little girl who liked to play, but we couldn't see her. We kind of thought he had an imaginary friend and thought it was cute. But he'd do really obscure and dangerous things that weren't like him, like trying to throw himself down the stairs, chewing through electrical cords, hitting himself, etc. I kept thinking I could hear people in the kitchen, and when I'd go to look, no one was there. There have been a few people who experienced the kitchen and thought someone was with them in there when there wasn't. And Tom told my sister there was someone in the kitchen, but there wasn't. I'd think I could hear stuff from the attic when I was upstairs, and we even got someone to inspect the loft thinking there were animals because it was so noisy, but there was nothing. I asked my sister what she remembers, and she said she remembers a balloon that wasn't helium floating upwards and staying in the air, and then being pulled about a bit. When we started to feel more creeped out in the house, we Googled Bella Lucia. The name translates to beautiful light, which is often to do with angels and angelical meanings. We couldn't find anything other than a book called The Haunting of Bella Lucia. But after we had that thought, we became terrified of Bella Lucia and who she'd ask my cousin to hurt next. It was minimal violence, not much a 3-year-old can do. We moved out a year or so after, and my cousin hasn't had any weird contact with Bella Lucia since. He doesn't remember a thing, which is normally weird because kids tend to not forget imaginary friends. It never got to the point where we were too scared to stay there. We kind of laughed about it, but when Tom turned creepy, we all would start to freak out a bit. We were more worried about him being hurt, honestly, but he seemed to have a good pact with Bella Lucia that would mean they'd play together and sometimes be naughty. I never thought about the fact that the next tenants might experience it, because I assumed that whatever it was attached to my cousin. I don't think I could live in a haunted house again, but I'd love to experience it for a night in a properly haunted place. I always think, though, when you know what kind of ghost or experience to expect, you create the fear yourself, and every noise you hear you assume is a ghost. I think if I lived somewhere and it had a friendly spirit in there, I wouldn't mind, but at the first sign of a paranormal activity moment, I think I'd be out, although that's easier said than done and would make a great viral video.